Nigeria. You are all welcome. You are all welcome. Now, the facilitator for this online event is Dr. Agbese, and she is a Carnegie Fellow and an Associate Professor in the University of Texas, United States. The objective of this online event is to promote effective presentation, which is in line with global best practices. In addition, the objective of this event is in line with the mission of Pan-Atlantic University, which is to form committed and competent professionals who are encouraged to contribute to the development of Nigeria, Africa, and the larger society. Please can we mute?
I think you're muted. Dr. Curry, I think you're muted. I think you're muted. I see you're muted and unmuted.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. So I was saying the objective of this event is in line with the mission of Pan-Atlantic University, which is to contribute to the development of Nigeria, Africa, and the larger society. And importantly, the School of Media and Communication at Pan-Atlantic University offers BSc, MSc, and PhD programs. We have the BSc in Mass Communication. We also have the BSc in Information Science and Media Studies. We also have the Masters in Film Production, which we call the MFP program. We also have the Masters in Communication and Media Enterprises. And we also have professional educational programs, such as the Media Innovative Program, which is sponsored by MTN Nigeria. So once again, you are all welcome. You are all welcome to this online event. You are all welcome. Thank you very, very much. Mr. Tolu Elukojo, are you there, please? Mr. Tolu, are you there? Okay. Dr. Agbese, are you there, please?
Yes, I am.
Yes, without wasting so much time, I think we should proceed further, please.
Okay.
Yeah, hello,
thank
sir.
you very much. Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Curry. I think I'm talking over
Dr.
someone.
Agbese, can you hold on a minute, please? Mr. Tolu, are you there now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, please. Thank you
very much, Dr. Nelson. So before we move on to the workshop proper, I would like to read a brief citation of the Dr. Aje-Ori. So I'll be sharing my screen in a moment, please. Okay. Just a moment. All right, good morning, everyone. Please confirm you can hear me, please. All right, so here is a brief citation of our facilitator, Dr. Aje-Ori Agbese. Dr. Aje-Ori is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, in the United States. She receives her doctorate degree in communication studies with an emphasis in mass communication and intercultural communications, and a minor in African history and politics from Bowling Green State University. She has worked in different capacities in public relations, journalism, and social organizations in Nigeria and the United States. Her research interests are on Nigerian media, Nigerian women and media, and teaching. She is the author of 3 books, including a textbook on media writing and several peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and more. She's also the recipient of several research and service fellowship awards, including the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship and 6 teaching awards, including the University of Texas Systems Regent Outstanding Teaching Award. So I present to you Dr. Aje-Ori. So Dr. Aje-Ori, you can have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Todu. I hope everyone can hear me because it's interesting to me that the network has me lagging. So in case my words are going faster than my face, please don't be upset. It's just what it is. Before I jump into the presentation, I do want to say a very big thank you to the Carnegie Africa Diaspora Program, as well as the School of Media and Communication at Pan Atlantic University for making this event possible. And I especially want to thank Dr. Obiaya, who is the Dean of the School of Media and Communication. I want to thank Tolu. I want to thank Mr. Callistus. I want to thank David and everyone else on the team who has worked hard to organize this event and make it possible. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for being here. So this particular workshop is the child of an observation. So over the years in attending conferences in Nigeria and outside of Nigeria, I have observed that many of our graduate students and even undergraduate students, when they present, they have really good papers. However, the problem tends to be that when it comes to delivery, they don't do a good job. Okay, and this might be because they're anxious. You know, anxiety can make you have a terrible presentation. It could also be that they lack the training that's necessary for delivering an effective presentation. And there's also the possibility that it's a combination of both things, right? So there are people who suffer from anxiety, but they also didn't have any training. And when you put those things together, you don't have a successful presentation. So what can we do to fix this? And it's something I've been thinking about over the years. And this workshop is one way we can change the narrative. So our purpose in this presentation is to give you some of the information we hope you can use in your next conference. And it doesn't have to be a conference. You can actually use this information and the skills we'll talk about in any kind of presentation or any kind of setting that requires a presentation. So overall, what I'm going to do today is to achieve 3 goals. So in my presentation today, I will first of all discuss the process that you can follow to have an effective presentation at a conference. Then I will share some tips. I will sprinkle those along the way as well. And finally, our hope is that by the end, we can have you all in breakout rooms so you can try out an activity based on one of the skills we'll talk about today. Okay, so in essence, the process of delivering an effective presentation requires 2 things. You need planning and you need practice. If you don't plan a presentation, you're not going to do well. And if you don't practice your presentation after putting it together, you're also not going to do well. So these 2 ingredients are key, regardless of the kind of presentation you're doing. You have to plan it and you have to practice it. So let's look at the elements of planning, right? What would you say and anyone feel free to either put this in the chat or unmute yourself and answer the question. But what would you say is the first thing you should consider once you get your letter of acceptance for a conference? Anybody? Can everyone hear me? Okay, all right. So for some reason, the chat isn't showing up on my end. So if anyone has written anything, I'm not seeing it. But anyway, the first thing you want to consider when you're planning is time, right? So how much time will you be given for your presentation? The average time that we have for presentations at a conference is 10 minutes. That means that you might have less than that, or you might have more than that. And that usually depends on the kind of setup that they have for the conference. So if you've been invited to speak on something, you're actually going to have more time than someone who's going to be on a panel. So if we have a panel, usually the time is divided, right? So if it's a round table or panel, the time is divided by all the people who are participating. So time is the first thing you want to plan for. How much time will I have? And you have to consider time, because some conference moderators or respondents, they're very strict with time. So if they say you have 10 minutes, you have exactly 10 minutes. You can't go over that. So you have to make sure that whatever it is you intend to talk about can be said within 10 minutes. The second thing we always have to consider is the setup. In other words, what's the format of delivery? How are we going to present? Again, is it a round table? Is it a poster? Is it, a panel of people? You always have to consider that setup, because you have to be mindful of the other people you're presenting with. You have to be mindful of the arrangement. Are they asking you to have time for responses? Are they asking you to have time for questions and answers with the audience? That's always important. And then in terms of setup, I think people always forget that the location of a conference is really, really important. So where are you supposed to deliver your presentation? Is it a classroom? Is it a ballroom in a hotel? Is it a teeny tiny space? And these things can change, right? Because you're going to think, wow, I'm going to a conference and maybe 20 people show up. But at the end of the day, only 5 people showed up. And so you have this large space and it seems quite awkward. So things can change. The reason why I say you should always think of location in your planning is that there are times when conference organizers can tell you that they will have the equipment you need. So just show up, plug things in, and everything will be fine. But that's not always the case. I had a conference in Ogun State a few years ago, and we were told that they had all the amenities we needed for PowerPoint presentations. And so I did prepare a PowerPoint presentation. But when I arrived at the university, I actually took the time to find where I was going to present. And I went into the room, and when I looked at it, I realized they really didn't have anything set up. So thankfully, I had a plan B, and that helped me with the presentation. The third thing we want to look at is audience. Whom are you going to be talking to? Now, when you go to conferences, almost everybody there is an expert in some way. And so you can't go there and start teaching them things they already know. So your delivery or your presentation has to be based on something new, something controversial, something that people don't really know about, right? So you don't want to focus on things they already know. And you also have to understand that even at conferences, some people come there because they're interested in your subject, but some people come there because they have to be there. And that might sound like a bad thing, but it is the reality. I've been to conferences before where, because certain panels didn't have enough people, the organizers would push people into those rooms just so that people would feel, good that people came to their presentation. And so you always have to factor these things in your planning, because if you are only focused on the people who know your subject, you're probably going to lose those who know nothing. So I always recommend that you have a mix so that if there are people are not familiar with, define them. But generally know the people who are going to be there. Are they experts at this or are they novices? And make sure you address it as a result of that. Thirdly, think of how you're going to deliver your presentation. Will you use a manuscript, or are you going to memorize your presentation, or are you going to be extemporaneous in your delivery? So manuscripts seem to be the #1 way of delivering presentations in Nigeria. A lot of us simply write out everything we're going to say, and then when we get to the presentation, we sit down and we read the entire thing to our audience. I don't have a problem with reading. However, the issue with manuscripts sometimes is they prevent you from connecting with your audience. So if all you've done is read the entire thing without keeping eye contact, without looking up every now and then, you're going to lose your audience and your presentation will end up seeming boring and really long. So you want to avoid that if you can. Memorization is also good, but you have to be really good at memorization, because many people, once they lose a word, everything goes. So if you're not good at memorization, please don't use this form of delivery. The gold standard of delivery is what we call extemporaneous delivery. And this allows you to combine your manuscript, memorization, but the reason why it's the gold standard is because it allows you to speak naturally. So when people see extemporaneous delivery, they see that they've researched what they're doing, they've practiced what they're doing, and they've planned everything properly. And so extemporaneous delivery is the result of proper planning and practice. Finally, you always have to ask yourself, do I need visual aids? Do I need pictures? Do I need graphs? Do I need charts? If I need those things, then I need to start planning for them from the beginning. You can't afford to wait till the last minute and then you add them in. Some people actually decide to use visual aids because other people are using them. And what that tends to do sometimes is the visual aid seems out of place because you're like, I'm not really sure why you needed this in the first place. And so it makes it quite awkward. So you have to plan for all these things at the planning stage. Consider all these elements so that you can have an effective presentation. So far, does anyone have any question on anything I've said or needs clarity on anything I've said so far? Yes, no? Yes? Okay, all right. If you have any questions at any time, please put it in the chat and we'll see how we can get to it at the proper time. All right, so once you've looked at planning, the second thing you have to consider is, and this is not working, is preparing your speech, right? So the best way to prepare your speech is to outline it. And this means that you're going to write down probably every single thing you're going to say. And there are many forms of outlines that you can use. It all depends on the purpose of your presentation. So if your presentation is meant to persuade people that the Labour Party did not win the last presidential elections in Nigeria, what you can use as your outline is what we call a problem, cause, solution outline, whereby you look at the problem that occurred during the election, then you talk about the causes of the problem and then discuss your solution. If you don't want to do that, and let's say your purpose is to teach people about a certain concept, you can use what we call a process outline, and process outlines basically go through the steps, right? So whatever form of outline you use, they're going to have three main parts. The first part is an introduction. So the introduction has 5 main responsibilities. It grabs people's attention. It also sets the tone. So is it going to be formal, informal, casual, conversational? It establishes your credibility because you say, this is why I'm the person to talk to you about this particular subject. It tells people your purpose, your why. This is why I'm doing this. And then it's an opportunity to preview the presentation so people know what's coming up. The second part is the body. So usually we have what we call main points, and your main points are really the meat of your presentation. If you only have 10 minutes, I recommend using no more than 3 main points. If you have an hour, please feel free to use 5 or 6 or 7. But your main points will usually have sub-points, which are supportive information that help people have a better understanding. The third part is your conclusion. A lot of people skip this part. I don't know why, but a lot of people skip this part. So you want to ensure that you actually finish your presentation. You don't just want to talk and say, okay, I'm done. Finish the way you started, right? And sprinkle throughout these parts are transitions. Transitions are words or phrases that indicate a change is coming. So when I'm going from the introduction of my presentation to the body of my presentation, there has to be a word that signals to my audience that I'm moving on to something else. If I'm going from the body to the conclusion, I can do that as well. So you can use what I call order words like firstly, secondly, thirdly, or you can say the first thing I want to talk about, the second thing I'm going to do, or the first step, the second step, all those things work quite well. You can also use questions to indicate that something new is coming, so people answer the questions. You can use summaries, you can summarize the points you just made and bring something new. Now, I recommend using this kind of outline for your conference presentation. Like I said, there are many you can use, but this is what I use. And you will notice that I've used guiding questions. So instead of using particular terms or what have you, I've used guiding questions like, what did I study, right? So let's say my paper is on intimate partner violence in Nigerian media. Really, I can tell you in one sentence what I studied. I studied the presentation of intimate partner violence in Nigerian movies. Why did I study it? I can say I studied it because it's a fascinating subject, or I can say it's because Nigeria has one of the highest rates of intimate partner violence in the world. Then I will share my questions if I had any, as well as my hypothesis. Some people use both. So it's always a good idea to put those out there. And then how did I find answers? You're going to see that these are your methodologies, right? So essentially, you have to share your method, how you found your answers, and then tell us your answers. What did you find, as well as your conclusions? You will notice from this outline that there is nothing here about your literature review. I've observed that a lot of our students, when they give presentations, tend to focus a lot on the literature review. You really don't need to talk about the literature review at a conference. You're talking to people who are more interested in what you studied, how you found answers for those things that you studied, as well as the results. And they find those more important because this is a better way of having an interaction, and they can give you feedback on what you said and what you found and so on and so forth. So I'm not saying you shouldn't cite sources. Please cite sources. So if you use some people and their work is really important, by all means cite those sources, but do not overwhelm presentation with sources, because what will end up happening is you're going to sound more like you're lecturing people more than you're presenting your findings or your arguments. So if you can, please avoid that. I have also put a copy of an outline in the chat that you can download that can help you in your next presentation. So feel free to download that from the chat. It's already there for you to use. Okay, so are we doing good so far? So far, so good? Tolu? It's kind of interesting, Teams, because I don't know if people can hear me or not. All right. Tolu, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well. I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Just wanted to be sure. Like I said to Tolu earlier, Teams is not my thing, but you learn something new every day. Okay. So after the outline, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the introduction, because like I said, introductions are key. They can make or break your presentation. So if your introduction is not a good, strong one that sets the tone, that grabs attention, you're going to have some problems down the road. Some of the best conference presentation attention grabbers that I've seen over the years are the ones I've put up here. So if you want, you can start with a question, right? So you can ask people a question. There are two kinds of questions you can use in presentational speaking. There's what we call rhetorical questions, and rhetorical questions really don't require an answer. They're sort of like, you know, those questions your mom asks you when you misbehave, like, do you want to die? And you can't really say to your mom, yes or, or no, because, you know, you need to keep quiet at that point. So rhetorical questions do not require answers or responses from the audience. They are asked in order to make a statement. So if you want to make a bold statement from the beginning, a rhetorical question is the way to go. But if you want the audience to participate in what you're doing, I recommend asking what we call response questions. And response questions are great because they allow the audience to interact with you. When my students use response questions, one of the things they sometimes do is they use quizzes and then they bring candy. And then if you get the answer correctly, they'll give you a piece of candy. And I used to think this was something that only students would enjoy, but then we did it at a conference once and we actually had professors who were really into the candy part. So yes, questions are great because they can get the audience interested in it quite quickly. You can also use quotations. If you find a quotation that's really strong and is a great way or lead into your topic, please use it. So you have to make sure, however, that the quote that you've selected is strong enough and interesting enough and attractive enough to get people interested in what you're talking about. So you can either use something you find online or use something you found in your research, because sometimes when we do qualitative research and we interview people, they say really, really interesting things. And you can start with that, right? And it blows people's minds like, what? Okay, so you can use a quote. If you don't want to use quotes and you like numbers, by all means, use numbers, use statistics, right? Like, I study intimate partner violence in Nigerian media, and one of the most shocking statistics I found last year was that 89% of Nigerian women have experienced intimate partner violence. That is a high number. And so when you start your presentation with something so startling and so unexpected, you get people going, And then there are those, of course, who are naysayers who would be like, nah, not really. But it is quite high, right? Not to mention, I think last year or earlier this year, it was announced that about 25% of Nigerian men are victims of intimate partner violence. So numbers work quite well. You don't want to use numbers, try telling stories. You can tell your own story or from someone else. I love telling stories. Stories are usually my go-to attender because a lot of my research is based on exploratory topics that people haven't yet covered. And so I have a tendency to tell the story of what attracted me to this particular thing. You will notice that when I started the presentation, I also used a personal story. I said this workshop is the result of an observation that was made. Now, you can also use visual aids. You can use pictures, you can use a graph, you can use a chart. There are many things you can use. But whatever you use, please make it memorable when it comes to visual aids. My favorite visual aid that I've ever seen at a conference was one that a Nigerian professor who was talking about the use of Oriki, and I hope I said that right. So please forgive me if I mispronounced it. But he used Oriki as a form of, as a communication tool. So he wanted to talk about how in Yoruba culture and Oriki is not just poetry, it's also a form of communication. And the reason why I've remembered this, and I went to this conference, I think in 2008, I've still remembered it, is because of how he used visual aids. And so he came to his presentation dressed in native Yoruba attire, and when he was ready, he put the Oriki he was going to perform on a slide. And so he didn't just read it to us, he actually performed it. And so by the end of his presentation, we were also interested in the topic. We had tons and tons of questions to ask about it, and it went very well. Overall, what I would say when it comes to attention grabbers is you should always think of them as things that break the ice between you and your audience. And so you want to keep it short and simple. This is not the place to have one really long story. You don't want to do that. So keep it short, simple, memorable. You also want to make sure that it matches your style. If you don't have a style for public speaking, get one. Okay, you need to get one. Okay, so match it to your style. Some of us like to tell jokes, right? But always remember that not everybody finds your jokes funny. So you want to make sure that you tell jokes that actually are funny and can be appreciated for their humor. So if you do mimetic studies, for instance, where you look at memes, you can actually put up one meme that is really, really funny. Like, we had a bunch of memes during COVID. We had a bunch of memes during the last presidential election. Pick any of those and start. So what's your style? Match your attention getter to your style. Thirdly, you want to always connect your attention getter to the audience and the presentation. If you tell a story, make sure you connect it to the audience in terms of relevance. So why is this particular topic relevant to the audience? And how is it relevant to the presentation? So if you tell a story, but it has nothing to do with why the audience should be interested, and it has nothing to do with what you're going to talk about, then it's really not a good attention getter. So I can't ask a question and what I'm going to talk about doesn't even answer it. So please look at it that way. And then I always say to people that whenever you're going to do your introduction, please write it out word for word and practice it. The more you practice it, the more it stays in your mind. Never ever read an introduction to your audience, because like we said earlier, that's what sets the tone. That's what lets people see you as credible. That's what lets people see you as professional. So if you go there and you read your entire introduction to your audience, you're probably going to lose their attention. So whatever you can do to make this stay with you, please do it. Whenever I do presentations, I think I write my introduction probably 10 times. And the more I write it, the more it stays in my head. So always, always do that. Now let's talk about conclusions, right? So you've introduced it, you've given the body, and I'm not talking about the body because I often find that's not a problem, but concluding your speech or introducing your speech, those are often areas where I see a lot of challenges. And so when you're going to conclude your presentation, please don't use any of these. Don't say, that's all I wanted to say, that's all I wanted to share. Don't say, that's it, I'm done, or I'm out of time, so thank you for listening. Don't do that. You have to use some finesse to get people to see that you actually took the time to put this together. You took the time to end on a good note. If you're running out of time, I don't recommend saying I'm out of time. You can quickly go through your conclusion and then wait for your question and answer session or period. And then whatever gaps you were unable to fill, you can fill them there. So please avoid that. So the best conclusions, and there are several, you can do a summary, right? You can summarize everything you said. So in my presentation today, I went over A, I went over B, I went over C. You can involve the audience, like your professors do, like they want to find out if you listened. And so they'll ask you all these questions and see who will answer them. So definitely you can involve the audience as a way of ending. You can use a quote, and that often works well if you started with a quote, so end with a quote. You can also tell a story. For instance, in journalism, we have a style of writing whereby when we start with a story about someone, we end with a story about how that person is doing. And that way, people see the connection between the beginning and the end. If you don't want to do all these things, you can just signal. So in conclusion, overall, whatever it is, you can signal what you want people to understand, and signal that you're concluding, and that works very well as well. What I will say always with a conclusion is make sure you end on a memorable note. People liked you when you started, They should like you when you finish, right? So end on a memorable note. Finally, we'll talk about visual aids because those are quite challenging. What I often see people do at conferences when it comes to visual aids is they turn the entire visual aid into the presentation. And what they end up doing is they stand in front, oh God, they stand in front of the visual aid. I've seen this in so many Nigerian movies, it gets on my last nerve. Why would you prepare a visual aid and then you're going to stand in front of it and nobody can see what you're talking about? But some people also put everything on it and then they stand to the side and they simply read the entire PowerPoint to you. Gosh, you don't want that. So that's challenging. So what I always say is you have to ask yourself when you put your visual aid together, is your goal to lecture or is it to inform? Are you planning to lecture people? If I come to your presentation at a conference, I am not there for you to lecture me. I am there for you to inform me about what you studied and what you found. So it is important then that your visual aid should aid your presentation. It should not become your presentation. It should aid your presentation. So you can use cue words that will help you remember what you're going to say. You can use pictures that will help you remember what you're going to say, but don't make your visual aid your presentation. Okay. Another thing you also have to do is, like I said, when we talked about planning, is you have to prepare them in advance. Things can change, things can happen, but prepare them in advance. So you have them and you can use them when you need them. You also have to keep them simple, keep them really, really simple, right? So that anyone can look at these things and understand what you're saying. If they don't understand what you're saying, then at least use pictures that you can explain so people have some clarity about what it is you're talking about. Is it large enough? Is it readable? I don't know if anyone has experienced this, but let's say you go to a presentation and the person used 12 font size or 12 size font to write everything on the screen. And if you're like me, you're going to need thicker glasses to be able to read it, right? So please don't do that. Make sure it is large enough. Make sure people can read it. You also have to look at color. Did you use color effectively? You'll notice I'm using your standard black and white, but you will also notice that challenge is in red because it is something I want you to focus on, right? So it's important for you to understand that visual aids can be challenging. So it is important that you use colors effectively. Don't use a black background and black lettering. Yes, I've seen that. Don't use a white background with white lettering. Don't do that. Don't use what we call shouting colors, colors that are so bright they blind you. You know, so you always have to look at the colors you've used and use them effectively. Thank God, PowerPoint now has a section on accessibility, and you can use that accessibility button to see if your color, the colors you've used in your presentation are accessible to anyone in your audience, whether they are visually impaired, whether they are deaf, you know, or is this in some way going to prevent people from seeing what you've written? So you can use that accessibility button to see if you've done an effective job with color. Is it overloaded? A lot of times, yeah, especially if you're using a lot of words, right? So it can be overloaded. Cut down the words, simplify it as best as you can, and always practice with your visual aids. Always practice with your visual aids. So if you're using PowerPoint slides, practice with the visual aid. Don't just make the visual aid and then show up on that day. What's going to happen is you're going to rely so much on that visual aid that you won't have any connection with your audience. So practice with your visual aid. And then I always say have a backup plan, right? Like people say these days, having a backup boyfriend, right? So have a backup plan, right? So have a backup plan so that if something goes wrong with visual aid A, then I have a backup plan that will suffice. So like I shared with you from my experience with the conference I went to in Ogun State, if I had relied only on the visual aids that I put together, I wouldn't have done a good job at that conference. So fortunately, my backup plan was a presentation without any visual aids, and it worked out quite well. So I've been fortunate in that area. So if for instance, you're given a presentation on copyright mistakes. If you look at these two slides, I'm sure that you will agree with me that one is going to do a better job of grabbing attention, keeping people focused than the other. The one on the left is really defining copyright. And if I'm given this presentation at, say, the Association of Educators of Mass Communication and Journalism, and I'm given the presentation in their media law section, then defining copyright is probably not the way to go, because these are people who study media law, they study copyright. So coming there to define it is not going to do a good job. Moreover, you will notice that this is really overloaded. So this kind of visual aid would work if I'm teaching students in the classroom, but the one on the right is probably going to be more effective because, again, if you look at the topic, paper on copyright mistakes, and the title there says, don't be stupid. And I have two pictures that people can look at and it brings up a conversation. So why would you say we shouldn't be stupid when it comes to copyright? So the picture will allow me to explain, to tell the story behind the picture. And so people can understand why it's important if you're using copyright to respect the law and how things are done, right? Okay, so what tips can I share that would help you on your journey? First and foremost, I would say, and I've said this a few times already, always practice your presentation. Practice it a few times, practice it 10 times. Stand in front of the mirror, stand in front of your friends. These days, get your cell phone, prop it up, and pretend you're going to do a TikTok video and simply just practice it. Practice it, play it back, see how you're doing. So practice makes perfect, maybe manageable, okay? But practice your presentation a few times. Be yourself, right? Your presentation day is not the day for your long lost American accent to come out of anywhere, right? If you didn't have an American accent or a British accent before you started, please don't start now. Okay, so be yourself. I think you should also look at your body language. I tend to use my hands when I speak. That's natural for me. As long as I don't look like I'm directing a plane, it's okay, right? You sometimes see that some people are so nervous, they start dancing, right? So you want to be aware of what your body is saying whenever you're giving a presentation. So be yourself, but also be aware of what you're saying, because we say in communication that 70% of communication is body language. So be aware of that. You want to embrace your style. And like I said before, if you don't have one, please get one, right? So find out who you are and how you like to communicate with people and embrace that style. You love to tell stories, tell stories. You want to make people happy, make them happy. You want to make them cry, make them cry. But whatever your style is, please embrace it and use it. Always keep eye contact. This is often a hard thing for people to do at conferences, and I think that's why a lot of our students in Nigeria tend to prefer reading. But if you don't keep eye contact, you're actually sending the message that you're not prepared, or you're not really interested in what you're doing, or you're not knowledgeable about what you're saying. And I always say, if you took the time to do a research project, you are more or less the expert on that project. And so someone said, this project was good enough for public consumption, so you should be confident enough to share that information with anyone. So keep eye contact. If you don't know how to keep eye contact with people, my tip that I often give to people I work with is I say, pick 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how many people are in the room. Pick people you can look at and just keep changing your eye contact. So you can look at someone for 3 seconds, look at the next person for 3 seconds, 3 seconds, and keep doing that. You can practice eye contact with your friends. You can just stare at each other. Not the Z world kind that is kind of awkward, but keep eye contact with people and see if you can strengthen your eye contact if you're not good at that yet. I always say breathe. Some people hold their breath. I've seen people faint because they held their breath. They were so anxious about the presentation, they just held it in. So please breathe, or like Auntie Flora says on YouTube, please breath, okay? So it is important that you don't hold your breath. breathe. If you're anxious, breathing is actually a good way to relax your body, and it will help you feel better about what you're trying to do. So don't hold your breath. You also should try practicing vocal variety. That means that some people have what we call a monotone, whereby they speak in one way the whole time. In the United States, there's a very popular actor who uses a monotone because all he does is, for clear eyes, try, so he speaks in in one tone the whole time. You want to vary it. You want to go from happy to serious. You want to go from angry to joyful. You want to vary it. One of the best ways you can have vocal variety is using tongue twisters. So, Father Francis fried 5 fish for 5 fathers on Fridays, right? Or, whatever tongue twister you can think of. I'm sorry, those always make me giggle. But yes, you can try tongue twisters. They're really good. One of the things I often do is I use punctuation when I use tongue twisters. So I'll have a period in the first line, then I'll have an exclamation mark in the second one, I'll have a question mark in the third one. And so because I'm conscious of the punctuation and the pronunciation, enunciation that goes with that, I can practice vocal variety. So please practice vocal variety so that your presentation, your delivery sounds more natural and more interesting. Because believe it or not, your voice can say so much. The voice, the tone you use can either make people say, wow, or can make people say, ugh. Okay, so practice vocal variety. Final tip of the day is have fun with your presentation. Always have fun with what you do, right? And conference presentations shouldn't be anything less. So have fun with what you do. Enjoy what you're doing, because when you enjoy it, people see that you enjoy it. And they say happiness is contagious, right? Enjoyment is contagious. And so when you do things that way, I find that people gravitate towards your presentation because they can see that you're enthusiastic about what you're talking about. And so they're really going to be invested in what you're saying, right? So overall, what have we learned today? So we've learned that if you're going to have an effective presentation, it is important that you plan. You have to plan for time, you have to plan for setup, you have to plan for your audience, your location, your visual aids, your type of delivery. You must plan. Secondly, you must prepare. So to prepare means you have to outline your speech. You have to write down probably everything you think you could possibly say and put that in a way that you can easily guide yourself. And so once you've prepared for your presentation, take the time to practice it. Don't just prepare and then go there. Practice it. Once you've practiced and you're comfortable with it, it is time to present. So once you present, may the Lord be with you. Everything will be fine. Okay? I always say that success is usually planning, meeting preparation. So you've planned for this, you've prepared for it, you've practiced for it. So why shouldn't it go well? And if you're like me, I always have butterflies in my tummy whenever I speak to people. Always, 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 always. And people always say, well, I don't notice that. I notice that. So a little bit of anxiety is normal. Butterflies in your tummy, that's normal. You just don't want to let that overwhelm you. So it's important that you keep that in mind. Okay? So hopefully in the time I've spoken, I hope you've gotten a few tips that will help you with your next presentation. And I look forward to seeing great things from you. So before we look at, I don't know if there are any questions. Tolu, do we have any questions? Or Dr. Courier, do we have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat.
Yes.
Okay, then. Oh, we do?
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Aje-Ori. It has been a very insightful talk. Please, do we have anybody with questions? You can use the chat box or you can raise up your hand if you have any question. Anybody?
Okay.
All right. While we wait for that, I think I have one. Okay.
Okay. If you have it, please feel free to ask it because it's taking a while on my side. Okay. Title.
Right. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
So here's my own question while we wait for others. So you said we should be ourselves and we should be aware of what we communicate with our body while presenting, right? So I was just wondering, how do we avoid miscommunication with body language since it is not universal? Yes. How do we? Yes.
You're absolutely right. It's not universal. What I will say is that it's not that our body language is not universal. I would say the interpretation of our body language is what isn't universal. For instance, you can do a thumb up sign in some parts of the world, and that's a good thing. You can do the same thumb up sign in Japan, and that means money. And in some cases, it means you want to fight with someone. So the interpretations are what's different. So one of the ways you can actually handle this is to understand your audience. So if I'm presenting to people in Nigeria, then I understand the cultural interpretations that go with body language, and I will keep those in mind when I present to people in Nigeria. If I'm going to the United States, I know, for instance, some of the nonverbal cues to keep in mind. For instance, Americans value eye contact. So if you ever go for a visa at the American embassy and you're not keeping eye contact, they actually read that as a negative. They don't read that as a positive. So eye contact in American culture is valued. In our culture, I think we value eye contact. However, we say that, if you're younger, you shouldn't keep eye contact with someone who's older. And so I wouldn't stare at someone who's older than me. I'm kind of, find someone who's around my age level and see how we can make it work. So that's what I would say. Your audience should guide the kind of body language that you use, and it will guide the interpretations that are given to it. Nevertheless, still be yourself. There are people who will use the body language according to their own interpretation, and to ensure that people do not misunderstand, they will actually explain what that means in their culture. And it's always a learning opportunity. I think Dr. Okorie has one.
Yes, my question is just a follow-up with what Mr. Olaguji was asking regarding body language, and my own emphasis here is power poses. Power poses for physical presentation.
Sorry, so Nengi's. Okay, go ahead. Now you're muted.
You muted everybody. Okay, let's continue.
Dr. Okay, please unmute, please. I think he's muted.
I'm unmuted now. Yes. Okay. Yes. My question is a follow-up with what Mr. Olaguji asked, but mine is more in the area of power poses. You actually pointed out issue about eye contact and the context here in Nigeria. What we say about power poses particularly, for example, there are some power poses you put your hands in your pocket while speaking in presentation. There are power poses where you put your hands on your hips, showing that you are in charge when making presentation. There are power poses of showing superiority and the like. So power poses of even sitting down, crossing your legs. So what do you say about power poses, especially in terms of cultural content? Because this issue has been coming up. People say, look, you shouldn't be putting your hands on the hips when you are here in Nigeria, or putting your hands in the pocket when you're talking to elderly people. What's your take on this, please?
Well, my take on it is, from a Nigerian perspective, I think that's mostly a masculine thing. No offense. But I think it's men who use power poses more than women, right? And, I would say from my experience, when I've been to conferences in Nigeria, the people who have used power poses, like putting their hands in their pockets, putting their hands on their hips, are usually professors. And then every now and then I see PhD students who do the same thing. I'm on the side of those who say, try to avoid power poses when you can, because it sends the message that you're intimidating, right? So if you can put your hands down, do that. If you can put your hands on the lectern, which is, the small podium that you have to give a presentation, put it there. Or you can vary it, right? So you can strike a pose like Superman, 1 second, and then bring your hands out the next. But I also think people use power poses because, not just because of what they've been trained to do, but also because I think we've been taught through examples that we've seen with our professors that when we stand in front of people, our hands have to go in that position, right? So it's what we've learned from watching professors. I know when I started teaching, I used to put my hands behind my back because every professor I knew who was female put her hands behind her back, right? So yes, I agree that power poses can be intimidating, but you can vary it, right? Because it's who you are. And you should ask yourself, really, why are you using power poses? Are you trying to flex? Are you trying to intimidate? So why are you using them? And 9 times out of 10, they're not viewed positively. I've never seen anyone use them and people have thought, oh yeah, that's, yeah. So I hope I've answered your question. I think you're muted again.
Yes, you did. Yes, thank you for that. But I just have just one more question, if you don't mind. It's just about, maybe I missed it, talking about images, presentation of images. Is there any rule of thumb saying how you should present images? Maybe the first slide, you can leave 2 slides, you put another image, you miss 2 slides, to try and break gray matter. Is there a rule, or is there something you could recommend?
As far as I know, there isn't a rule, or maybe I should say there isn't a spoken rule. Maybe that makes more sense. It's one of those unspoken things. So I recommend using no more than, say, 5 images, if you're using different slides. You will notice from my presentation, when I had images, I put them in one place, or I changed them up a bit. So it's a personal choice, but you also don't want to use too many. But this, of course, depends on the kind of presentation you're giving. If you're giving a presentation on photography, for instance, or on people, for example, you might need to use more pictures than fewer pictures, right? But if you're doing something where you're trying to help people understand things, then 3 to 5 pictures in a 10-minute presentation is probably going to be better for you than 10 pictures, right? I will say that one of the things I love about PowerPoint now is I can put things on a slide and I can use the designer mode, and it will help me organize my images in ways that are really interesting and really, really eye-catching. So you can try that as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So any more questions? Does anyone have any more questions or concerns? Anything that is giving you heart palpitations at this point? No? Okay, so Tolu, how do we get people into the breakout rooms then?
Okay, just a moment. I'll get back on that.
Okay, Adebumi said, I'm sorry, I don't know if you're a he or she. The slides, okay. I can make those available for you, factoring in the cost of petrol, and we can talk. Okay, can you explain more on visual presentation? Okay, so visual presentations these days tend to either come in the form of using videos or using pictures, charts, or graphs, and they're actually very good because they're good ways to get people interested. It feels like, they're watching a film or they're doing an analysis together. But if you're talking more about visual aids, I would say that if you decide to use visual aids, please ensure, like I said, that they're things that actually aid your presentation. They shouldn't be they shouldn't be things that become your presentation. So in the past, when I've used visual aids, I think there was one where I needed to show a video clip, and the presentation ended up being one where I showed the clip and then we had a conversation about that image. So yes, those are what we mean by visual presentation or visual aid. Oh, okay. Adebumiti. All right. we will make it happen. Thank you. Has everyone had a chance to download the outline from the chat box? Okay, not reading your introduction. What if it's too much? Ooh, if it's too much, then you need to cut it down. You really, really need to cut it down. The shorter your introduction is, the better. If you want, I can show you my introduction is about, the introduction I have for today is about half a page. And I didn't read it to you. I simply wrote everything down. And when it was time, I said it. And if I ever send it to you, you can look at it and look at the recording and you'll see it's not the same. So there are words I wrote down that I didn't even say. There are parts I wrote down that I didn't even say. So try to avoid reading your introduction if you can. When I teach public speaking, one of the things I often tell students is if there's anything you want to memorize in your presentation, your introduction should be it, so that you can actually look at people and, you know, have a conversation with them. Okay, all right. So is it possible to do the... Thank you, Emmanuel, you're welcome. All right. But can everyone unmute themselves? Maybe we can try the exercise together, if that would work, and have people just scribble something and read it out and see if that would help. Tolu, what do you think? Would that be better?
All right. We're actually working on the breakout session. Well, if it is okay with you, then we can do that, then see what you can do.
Okay, let's do that then. I'm just going to share the part.
All right. So we can break into 4 groups briefly.
Okay.
For how many minutes?
I think 10 minutes should be okay, because I'm sure there are people who have a few things they want to do.
Okay, 5 rooms.
Okay, 5 rooms. Okay, so in the breakout session, this is what I'm hoping you can all do. We're going to assume that you have a paper you're delivering soon, or maybe as part of your final exam, you have a presentation that you want to do. So while you're in your groups, please take a minute and think of an attention getter for your presentation and think your establishment of credibility. I'm going to ask that because of the time we have, you focus on number 1 and number 2, and you can always use the outline I sent you to, or that I asked you to download to try other things. So if we could all try writing an attention. Remember, it could be a question, it could be a personal story or someone else's story. It could be statistics, which are usually the easiest. It could be a quote, and so on and so forth. So, you know, whatever you think will get people to say, I want to listen to that. Just write it out and then tell us why you are the best person to talk to us about it. So why should I care that you're talking about this to me? So, yes. Oh, so sorry, Charles. We were praying that the network gods will not let us down, but it is what it is. But hopefully you should be able to get the recording from the SMC PAU page on YouTube.
All right, Doctor, can we break it now?
Yes, please.
All right. All right.
Please and thank you.
So yeah, it's already on. You can just join the room. You see the number of the room where
Okay, I think we're back.
Oh, wow. In the midst of
I
it.
think we're back. Was everyone able to have a good time? Yes, we're all back. Okay. Tolu, you want to? All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation today. If I can ever be of help to you with your projects or anything I can help with, feel free to send me an email at ajeori@hotmail.com. So it's AJEORI@hotmail.com. So feel free to contact me if I can ever be of help. I'm going to hand things over to Tolu to round things up. So Tolu. You see you here? Tolu.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Aje-Ori. It's been a very insightful moment with you. So on behalf of the School of Media and Communication Study, I want to thank everybody, particularly our facilitator and everybody that made it to this meeting. Thank you very much for being here. So we'll be waiting for your emails and reactions will follow from Dr. Aje-Ori. If you want to access the link to this workshop, you can get that on our YouTube page, the SMC YouTube page. You can look for it on YouTube. Yeah. And thank you very much, everyone, for being a part of the work. Right.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, Tolu. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Aje-Ori. I hope I got that right.
Yes, you did.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Okorie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Okorie, you were my lecturer in school.
Don't worry, I will deliver your message. I think it's on. I will tell him that. Good to have you around.
All right.
Okay. Obi Egeli, I guess, right?
Yes. Tell
All
him
right.
Obi.
Obi, all right.
Yeah.
He will hear.
In Mascop
All right.
apartment.
Good.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.